Welcome, divas and dudes, to Powerhouse Bakery. And oh my gosh, we are in the middle of holiday season. So as I was preparing for this, I was looking through some old pictures, and we've done cinnamon rolls before, and a few of you have done it. Remember, it was a couple years ago. Rachel, I think you were in there. You were in one of the pictures. So I'm so excited. So this is kind of the new and improved cinnamon roll. Powerhouse Bakery's been doing them for many years now, and we are so excited to have our beautiful Heidi here as our guest. She has just been an amazing baker that comes to us with so much talent. So really that's what happens at Powerhouse Bakery is, you know, I might have a little idea, but it's the people that bring this to light and really make it so workable and fun and of course yummy. And our philosophy is always 100% front and center, and that is, how do we have celebration and still focus on healthy? How do we make products that our families will recognize and be excited to try? Because of course we know the eyes eat first, and we want things to be familiar and maybe even sneak by them with, you know, a few healthy ingredients and they not even know it. So Heidi's been a wonderful example of all this too, because she's got young kids and she has to have dairy free, right? And some of you guys also do dairy free. I mean vegan.
My son is dairy free and has a nut allergy, and I'm gluten free.
Yeah,
so
gluten free.
This is a great place that we found.
Yes, it's been so perfect. We found her because we were doing her birthday cake. Her hubby ordered online. It was all a surprise. He got sick, so she had to pick up her own birthday cake. And it was right in the time where we were, you know, looking for a new team member. And so it was God's good grace that we got to have Heidi with us. And so today what I want to share is cinnamon rolls. And that's one of the archetypical holiday favorites. And of course it does bleed into the whole year of having cinnamon rolls, right? Who doesn't want to have a cinnamon roll even if it's the middle of June? And what makes this unique is that it is gluten-free, it's also dairy-free, it's also egg-free, and so it's pretty good, and it's very low in sugar. So what I want you to take away from today is the ingredients that we use and the technique. So, you know, of course, at Powerhouse Bakery, we're always trying to make sure we do very low sugar, but still have great flavor and great texture. And so that's, again, something that's super important to us. So I'm going to unload our ingredients, and then we're going to have our beautiful Heidi mix them together. And then we're going to really look at how we come about with this beautiful product. So there's a little bit of technique. Of course, the ingredients are key as well, but the finished product is so beautiful. So I really wanted you to get a feel, and this plate is still warm, so you are going to get to have one to enjoy. These happen to be just dressed with a very light cream cheese frosting, and so we are using a vegan tofuti, so it's cream cheese. I'm going to show you that ingredient, and a little bit of powdered sugar. And as I'm thinking about that, I think we could even take that frosting from Good to Great and use some honey powder. So I'm going to work on that and be checking back with us the first of the year, because, you know, anytime we're looking at our best foods list and trying to keep pushing the needle, keep pushing the idea of how do we go a little healthier, my thought just this morning with Heidi was, what if instead of the typical powdered sugar, we tried honey powder? So anyway, that's going to be something that we try. But I just thought these were absolutely gorgeous, and so they are going to be all packaged and ready for you to have when you are ready to head out for the day. Thank you, Mary. So let me unpack all of our ingredients. We've got organic brown rice flour. We've got sorghum flour. And we have a little bit of a starch. So you know, with typical gluten-free baking, because we don't have the gluten in the wheat flours, we have to do a blend of flours. Now, years ago when I did this recipe, we were still really in the infancy stages of what do you do without gluten? And so I was looking back on my oldest recipe, and I didn't even know about xanthan gum. So I had put a very tiny amount of that that particular ingredient. And now as we're learning, you know, we went through this phase of adding more and more of this gluten-free binder. And now this wonderful lady is helping me think of how to dial it back. Because with a typical gluten-free product, we want to do a blend of flours And so sorghum and brown rice are kind of a middle of the road as far as density. If we think of, the wide range of flours, wheat flour is kind of on the middle to heavy, as far as the density of flours. And the really light ones would be a highly refined like cake flour. So if you were going to make a cake and you went to buy cake flour, it's been processed to a really fine texture. And so that is very similar to our starch. And this one we're using tapioca, but in other gluten-free baking you could use a potato starch. You could use arrowroot. Those are just other examples of a starch. They all have a little different texture and quality. This one is of the lightest. So of the starches, the heaviest would probably be potato starch, meaning that when you add water, it is still a starch, but it makes it a little bit denser. Arrowroot is another fabulous one, and even cornstarch have very similar qualities that we could use in the kitchen. But on this recipe and in a lot of gluten-free flour blends, tapioca is that one because it's really easy to manipulate and it's kind of like cake flour as far as consistency goes. And then brown rice still has a lot of the protein in it, so that's why I picked this one. It has a lot of protein and it doesn't have as strong of a flavor as other high protein grains. So some kids and even grown-ups might taste a whole wheat pasta, for example, and think, oh, that's kind of a heavy flavor. It's kind of a nutty, that would be a nice word for it, or strong and bitter, right, for the whole wheat flour. So the alternative in the gluten-free world would be something like brown rice, or even heavier would be something like amaranth or teff flour. So those again are the heavier ones, and the brown rice is kind of in the middle of the road, because we're trying to find something that's similar in density and texture and flavor. And of course we're never going to get 100% on the whole wheat or even the processed wheat components, but we're trying. So sorghum is the other one. And so you can kind of see by the colors that they're not bright white like the tapioca starch, but they have a nice light texture and light consistency. If any of you have ever worked with my other flours, I also sell one that's a grain-free flour blend. And for a long time I packaged those and sold them, and we haven't done that lately. But the other types of flours would be quinoa flour, hazelnut flour, coconut flour. Those are all on the very other end of the spectrum as far as densities. The good thing is, without having the starchiness, because it's grain-free, it's going to have more protein and more fiber. But the palate is sometimes like, no. Don't like those flavors. They're too heavy, too strong. And so that's again why we picked sorghum, brown rice, and a little bit of tapioca. And then here comes that xanthan gum. So this one is kind of the structure. It's going to form the gluten strands. And when you have a whole wheat flour or even a enriched wheat flour, this texture is already integral into the flour because the gluten makes it. But because we're using flours that have very little or no gluten, we've got to put it in. So that's why Heidi was really smart to think of, working with that texture. How do we make it even more palatable? Taking out a little of the structure might make it more delicate, more enjoyable in the palate. So it's always a continuum that we're exploring and trying to figure out, what would be the best mix. And even if it was, as little as 6 years ago, if you went down the aisle of flours at H-E-B, you would be hard-pressed for finding a gluten-free flour blend, right? And nowadays, we've got so many different options. So if you have a family member like Heidi that needs to eat gluten-free, your challenge will be, well, which one's better? Which one's going to give me the best result? And in all honesty, there isn't a lot out there yet that I think are ideal. They're getting there, but this as something that's a true science. And so I've got these beautiful brains at work here that we're always trying to figure out how to make the best flavor, the best texture, the best nutrient value, and still have a wonderful product. So those are our flours. Then we also have a little bit of vegan butter. So tried and true to this recipe, we want to use something that is dairy-free. And so a lot of you know I love the Earth Balance brand. So that's what we've done there. And then we have a little bit of organic non-GMO sugar. And I think, Heidi, you had mentioned tell me the brand again?
Marina.
Marina, that's
So
right.
It's vegan. It's not processed with the animal bone char like typical white bleached processed granulated sugar. It's also that stuff is unbleached.
Yeah,
so
I love it.
One less chemical process it goes to.
Yeah, so even if it doesn't have the label organic, it means, and what she said is perfect, and that is that it's processed differently. So, you know, in all of our classes, we're talking about how to go from good to great. How do we get a sweetness that has the flavors that we're looking for? They still have, you know, 1 or 2 notches up the priority scale of healthy. And so the Marina sugar is the one that we picked for this. And it's the non-GMO, and it's been processed much healthier. And then we have some spray. I got a coconut pan spray, and I've got some warm water, which is going to be really important as she starts to blend. And of course, our beautiful Powerhouse Bakery mixing bowl. And then we've got a little bit of yeast and a little bit of salt. So I'm going to have her explain the importance of separating those out as we're doing the process. And let's see, I'm sure you're going to want to have this out. So go ahead and rearrange however you'd like, Miss Heidi. And this is a really cool little rolling pin. I'm going to have Heidi explain because it's a really cool method. So yeah, she's going to give you some hints on that. And I've got our mixing tools.
Is Marina spelled M-A-R-I-N-A?
Yes.
M-O-R-E-N-A. You can find it at H-E-B or Costco.
So really, we're trying to find like items to use that are less processed.
Yes. Yeah, so the goal always when we're doing a product here at Powerhouse Bakery is how do we make it healthiest? So lower processing is definitely a technique to make it healthier. All right, Heidi. So walk us through the mixing of the cinnamon rolls. Yes.
Can I have a spatula, please?
Yes.
Okay, so let's start with our dry ingredients. What we're going to do is just put all the dry ingredients into a bowl. So brown rice flour.
You have the amounts?
Yes, we'll be giving you the recipe.
Oh,
for sure.
Our sorghum. I love sorghum flour. I love the flavor of it. I make some yummy sorghum flour cookies at home. Our tapioca starch. And then we're going to throw our salt. This is just a half a teaspoon of salt, very little amount. And then our xanthan gum. And one thing that I think is very important when you're baking is to pre-mix your dry ingredients. So everything's kind of still separate in this bowl. If we were to mix our wets in here, it might not mix completely well. So you just grab a whisk and you just give it a quick mix. And that'll ensure that all your dry ingredients are well incorporated in your final product.
Yeah, I always teach this because sometimes folks are in the habit of putting everything in at once, and you really do get a different result. Even when the salts and sugars aren't mixed well, it definitely affects the value of the yeast.
So no baking soda, baking powder, none of that?
No, this is leavened with yeast.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful yeast.
So, there's 2 main types of yeast. Typically we use active dry. So this means we have to activate it before we put it in our product. So to activate yeast, it needs to be in warm water, specifically between 100 and 110 degrees. Anything below 100 will not activate it. Anything above 100 will kill the yeast. So I got this warm water right before we started. I'm going to dump in our active dry yeast. And then something that can help give your yeast a little bit of a boost is we can go ahead and just add our sugar for the recipe right in with the water and the yeast.
Does it matter if you use the rapid dry yeast?
Good question. So if you have the instant, like rapid rise or like bread machine, what you can simply do is you can use the same amount and just toss it right in with your dry ingredients, and you don't need to activate it with the warm water. You would just put it all together without doing this step first. Yep, give it a quick mix.
I always like to still put it in the warm water because if your yeast is old or it's not active, you'll know for sure. So even if you get the active dry or the instant, I always recommend, but you have to work quickly. And you have to feed it. You don't want to let the yeast sit around. Like you keep going as I chat. You don't want to let it sit around because the yeast will eat up the sugars or even the starch or the flour that you've added in, and it can putter out and not have its best quality.
So with this process, you don't have to let it set and rise
Once we get all the ingredients incorporated together, before we put it in the oven, we will, since it is a yeast dough, we will let it sit and rise. Once we form it,
yeah, it is really important that it has to rise.
Spatula.
Oh, sorry. We do have to let it rise, and that's the thing. So when you get all the ingredients mixed together, you now have the food for the yeast. You've dissolved it in the water, so you've opened it up, so it's kind of dormant, and now it's alive and breathing. So now we've got to mix all the ingredients fairly quickly, get it incorporated so that when the yeast breathes, it's going to start to add volume to the flour.
And then so we added our water, our yeast, and our sugar. Now we're going to add our melted butter. And you can just take a spatula. You can do it in a mixer if you want. Just use a paddle attachment if you're using your KitchenAid. I like to just do it by hand. Get it started with a spatula. And honestly, my hand I actually use to just finish getting a nice even mix. You don't have to knead the dough like you would a typical wheat dough, which is one nice thing.
Because the xanthan gum is already in there. So you have to formulate the gluten very similar to how you wake up the yeast. You formulate the gluten by massaging it in. And I got to tell you right now, it already smells fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
The yeast is awake and it's starting to breathe, and that's the smell that it gives off. So it's really a fun exercise to be able to include your grandkids and your kids because, yeah, look, with a gloved hand, and even if you have a really clean hand, you can do that at home. Make sure your fingernails are, tightly trimmed, and just get in there and play with the dough. But it's starting to smell like something like, Christmas morning already. So the importance is to have the water at least at 100 degrees. If the water is too cold, it might still turn on, but it'll take longer. It's kind of like a slow metabolism versus a fast metabolism. So that's why we want to have it right in that sweet spot. Now the problem is if you get it too hot, now you've killed it. So I'd rather you go low on temperature is better than high on temperature, because high on temperature you can't bring back the yeast.
So I have a question. When it comes to water, do you use, like, say, alkaline water or just regular tap?
Regular tap water is absolutely perfect.
Water in Texas is hard.
No, it'll be just fine. Yep. So Heidi, tell them a little bit about our wonderful rolling pin.
So you may not have this type of rolling pin at home, but that's okay. It has these handy dandy little, what do you call them?
Like they're borders.
Borders.
They're kind of like a rim.
And these particular ones are measured out at 1/4 of an inch. And so I don't have to sit there with a little ruler while I'm rolling it out and measure to make sure the thickness is the right measurement. But if you don't have one of these, that's okay. Just grab a ruler. You'll need one anyway for this recipe.
So 1/4 inch. So I remember last time when we did this recipe, I was looking back on our videos, and some folks rolled them really thin, and some folks rolled them a little bit thick. So again, there's no serious rule. Go ahead and I'll keep chatting. There's no serious rule, but watch how beautiful hers turns out when you get the right thickness. So even if you don't have this fancy rolling pin, just getting an idea of what a 1/4 inch looks like is going to really help.
So you're going to need parchment paper. Anytime you're rolling something out that's gluten-free, you're going to want non-stick spray. You're going to want parchment paper. Otherwise, you're going to have a really tough and sticky time getting the product that you want. So I'm going to go ahead and spray my parchment pretty liberally all around. And then I'm going to take half of my dough. This is a double batch. So I'm going to take half my dough.
Kind of tilt it so they can see what the dough looks like. Yeah.
There's the dough.
And see how it's kind of shiny? It's not sticky. It's not too wet. And so whenever you're making this at home, just getting a mental picture of what it should look like, I think is so valuable.
So this parchment paper, I'm going to fold it in half. And it's measured out, after we fold it, about 12 inches by about 16 inches, just for your reference, for your parchment paper at home.
And again, those inches aren't all that important, except that when you want the cinnamon rolls to be exactly the same size. So here at Powers Bakery, we're trying hard to get them all consistent. But if you don't have this size, don't worry. Just have one that you know about what size it's going to be so that you can repeat it if you want to.
So I'm just folding the parchment in half. I'm just kind of smooshing it down with my hands to start. And then I'm going to grab my rolling pin. And I'm just going to start rolling it out between the parchment.
And see how nice when she folds it, it stays in place really well. In the past, we've tried to put plastic wrap over it. That doesn't work well. This parchment is just a beautiful best case scenario because it holds itself in place.
And what's going to happen along the way, ooh, can I have that bench scraper?
Yes.
Is you can grab a knife, or I've got this handy bench scraper. It's going to start going out the sides. So what you can do is just cut that off, and you're just going to do a little bit of patchwork. Because we want it, it'll end up being, ours will end up being about the area of this parchment.
So remember when we were doing a lot of talk about handy gadgets? I'm just taking notes for us because if this is something you enjoy, it's really fun to have these gadgets that make it more simple. Again, we've been practicing this for at least 6 years, and since Heidi's been with us, even in the last few months, we've really gotten consistent with our roll and our technique, and the ultimate product is so much prettier.
So it'll take a couple rolls and a couple patches to get a nice rectangle going. One more.
So it's so workable, it's so smooth, it's not sticking.
Okay. Good.
Also notice, guys, when she's rolling it, what we need about that 1/4 inch is it keeps it up. So there are some rolling pins where you can adjust it. It kind of turns, it click, 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 and it makes it a fatter edge. But this one doesn't. It holds it stable because we know that's the size we like. So I just felt like it was such a great win.
Yeah, those are handy. Okay, now what we're going to do, we're going to simply lift the top of the parchment off and put it back down. So it'll make it easier to come off the parchment because we're going to flip it over. So what we're going to do, flip and have the open end of the parchment facing you. And now we're going to lift this off. And we're going to get ready to do our filling. So I'm going to set this aside for just a moment, and we're going to put together our filling ingredients.
So we've got cinnamon, we've got a little bit of brown sugar, and we have more of the vegan butter. So again, we're always trying to go from good to great. So we've really reduced the amount of brown sugar. So, you know, a typical cinnamon roll is ooey and gooey, and I think of like the Cinnabon, where it's just incredibly sweet. So how do we find the happy medium of how much sugar? So really, this is a lot more cinnamon and a lot less sugar. And we had a very small amount of sugar in the actual dough. So I've been so confident that we found the sweet spot as far as how much of the ingredients to use.
So all you need to do is pretty simple. Just melt your butter. And then just do your sugar and your cinnamon. When you're pouring cinnamon, careful not to take a big deep breath in or you're going to get cinnamon in your nose. That spatula.
You betcha. Do you remember how much cinnamon and sugar? I can write it down for the, this is the filling.
For this batch, it is a 1/2 cup of cinnamon, 1/4 cup of brown sugar, and a 1/2 cup of vegan butter.
And remember, these amounts are going to vary. The recipe that I'm going to give you is a smaller, family size. This makes quite a lot of the filling. So tell me one more time and I'll write it down.
Butter and cinnamon.
Because what's really nice is if you make this this filling, it's so good to use on other things. So that's why I thought, oh, it might be fun to have you keep this in mind. So half a cup of cinnamon is a lot. I feel like I'm always having to order more cinnamon at Powers Bakery because we've got a lot.
Okay, so we're going to add about 4 tablespoons of this filling mix onto your dough. So I have a little scoop, but you can just use a tablespoon measure. And then I have this little handy mini offset spatula. It works really well to spread it out. You can also just use a spoon. And I like to get it all over, all on the edges, the sides, the top, but leave about a half to an inch of just plain dough, no filling, right along your bottom edge, because that's going to help seal your cinnamon rolls together. Otherwise, they're going to end up with little cakes, which isn't bad.
But again, that's another secret that has really helped us because we used to lose so much of the filling. It would ooze out, you know, on the baking sheet, and we wanted to scrape it up and lick it and didn't want it to come out of the cinnamon roll. But Heidi helped us figure out a really great strategy to avoid that.
Okay, so our filling is on. Now we're going to roll it up. So here's where your parchment paper comes in yet again to help you. You're going to grab this top part, and you're going to use the parchment to help you roll it up. And so you're going to start by just rolling it ever so slightly. See how I've barely even started? And then I'm going to use my fingers to kind of just press this roll down. So that's going to give you a nice, tight roll. You're not going to end up with these big gaps on between your cinnamon roll layers. And just start by just pulling a little bit with the parchment, kind of just sealing that down, pull, seal. You'll get a nice, tight cinnamon roll.
So notice she's pulling with this hand too. So that's doing the roll while this hand is pressing the dough off of the parchment paper up there in the roll. And again, this is a whole new strategy for us that we've been so excited about because it's really given us a beautiful jelly roll style here. And now, once she does the cut, notice what she does to tuck in the little piece at the end so that all that yummy cinnamon stays inside the cinnamon roll.
Always make sure it's not too close to the end so you don't roll the whole thing onto the floor. And then it's hard for you guys to see, but
can you spin it around?
Oh, yeah.
Spin it around for me.
So right now it's like this. You see, I'm just going to keep rolling it a little bit more until the end is right underneath. And I'm just going to really lightly use basically the weight of the cinnamon roll to just kind of press that, and it'll help just seal the cinnamon roll right there. Now we're going to cut it into portions. So I have this handy bench scraper. It actually has measurements right on there, but you can just use a ruler and a knife as well. So we cut ours into 2-inch pieces to start. And I'm just going to measure each one out. Cut. Measure 2 inches. Cut. Okay, next we're going to unroll and re-roll. I'll show you what I mean.
Now
Okay.
you can just bake them this way. You don't really have to go to the next step.
Of course.
We used to just put them in the pan like this and they would just swell up and still they look really cute. So don't feel like it's a deal breaker if you forget this next step. It does make them look awfully cute to have this next step. So I just want to make sure you know that we've done it like this for a long time and they look yummy.
If you want to take it a step further and make them look like ours,
Yes.
you can do this.
Yes, yes.
So grab one. It's a pretty delicate dough, so just go easy with it, and you're just going to unravel it. So I'm going to do it kind of opposite so you guys can see. So I'm going to fold it this way. Just give it a nice quick little press, and then starting with the end that has all the cinnamony goodness, you're going to start doing another roll, a nice tight little roll.
Now watch when she does this. She's angling it so that there's a little bit of an extra lip on one side so that it's got a cavity or a little channel to hold the cinnamon.
So it's hard to see, but I'm kind of going at a little bit of an angle. I'm not going straight across. So that way, the center of my cinnamon roll is going to be a little bit higher than the outer edge. And I'm also tucking in my tail. That way it doesn't kind of fray out when it's baking, because sometimes it'll do that.
And like I said, we had that problem too. So that was a really good trick to tuck it under. So it looks, you know, really professional, but also it keeps all that yummy stuff on the inside.
So I'll show you again. Roll it out. Fold hot dog. And then with the cinnamon end, I'm rolling a little bit at an angle so that my center will be higher than the outside, and I tuck in my tail. There we go. Just
So
like that.
beautiful.
Yeah.
So beautiful. So as she's doing the rest of those rolls, what I'm going to do is write down the recipe for you. And again, we'll send you one for that'll be in the next e-blast. That'll be a smaller ratio. You know, but it's so fun to kind of know what we're working with, so you can have, if you want to go do it right now, you can. Right now. I can't wait to have my own. I know. Well, and I promised you this dough is a lot easier to work with. And to Heidi's benefit, we are really now learning how to do less xanthan gum. The xanthan gum will make it more workable. It's a stiffening agent, if you will. So you might start with a full amount, and then as you get better at it, you can pull off some of the xanthan gum. Because remember, the positive is that it's structure. The negative is that it makes it a little more tough, which our palate is used to some, but nothing is quite the same as wheat gluten, because it's got that really nice spongy, you think of sourdough bread, it has that wonderful spongy texture, which we can't quite replicate in gluten-free baking. Our sourdough bread is amazing, we're close, and this one is close, but just not quite. And notice how she's got the little top. See how the inside is a little higher than the edges? And so as she's rolling, it's that slight angle that's allowing that technique to really show off the inside of the cinnamon roll. So pretty. Xanthan gum is, right? Well, it's really something that's made in a lab. It's kind of the same idea as yeast, in that it's a product that is fermented and then it's freeze dried, so it's kind of like bacteria poop. You hate to say that, but it is. And some people seem to have an issue with it. It's probably quite a benign ingredient, but we just want to try to have as little ingredients as possible in our products. But of course, nothing's wrong with it as far as we know as food scientists. And again, it serves an important purpose. So in this batch, we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, and that's a half a batch. So it wouldn't be too much to do, and they do freeze really nicely. We're getting ready to really learn how to make this user-friendly for the freezer product. Like if we were to have this sold in a place other than Powerhouse Bakery, could we take it out of a box and practice with the frosting? And so it'll be really fun to see how well we can build this, so it'll really be something that families can enjoy if they don't want to make it on their own. So Heidi, go ahead and walk me through your ingredients.
Okay, you want measurements?
Yeah.
It was 2.5 cups brown rice flour, 2.5 cups sorghum.
So the same ratio of both of the flours. And so if you don't get our flour, you can get these individual ones and blend your own. So half a cup and half a cup. I'm sorry, 2.5 cups.
And then a half a cup of tapioca starch.
Okay.
1/3 cup xanthan gum.
And this is our decreased amount. So
Right.
we're working on making it a little softer. So you'll be the first ones to get to try this and see if we can dial it back. Because I think I mentioned when I first did this recipe, I was at a tablespoon. So we went up, up, up. Now we're trying to pull it back a little bit as we refine our skill.
And a half a teaspoon of salt. Very little salt.
That's just regular.
Yeah, regular salt.
Everything needs salt, so try not to go any lower than that. I promise you, when you're doing a low sugar recipe, you can't leave out the other flavors, which is why we really pumped up the volume of the cinnamon, because our palate is looking for a lot of bang. Remember, we called it food cocaine when it's a lot of sugar, fat, salt, and sweet. So pulling back a lot of the sugar means we can't leave out the salt. Okay, and what else?
Oh, I have it written down right here.
Oh, perfect.
It is a half a cup of sugar, 1 cup vegan butter.
I thought it was there. Thank you. 1 cup vegan butter. And again, there's lots of different vegan butters on the market, or you could use regular butter. If you don't have a dairy issue, that's a 1-to-1 exchange. So either way would be fine. I've also used the one that's with soy base. We happen to use at the bakery the soy-free as well as dairy-free, but the plus soy one is also perfectly fine.
And 1.5 teaspoons of active dried yeast.
All right. And how much water?
3 cups of water.
3 cups of water. So just as a review, what we did was we mixed the flours and the xanthan and the salt all together, and then we added the sugar to the warm water and the yeast. So we're letting the yeast come alive. We pre-mix all the flours, and as the yeast has dissolved and it starts to wake up and it starts to eat the sugar, then we're ready to add it to the flours, and then you add the butter, and then the process starts. And how long do you recommend we let the dough sit while it's growing?
So that's a good question. Honestly, it depends on the temperature in your kitchen. If you have a nice warm kitchen, you got your oven preheating, it might only take about 20 minutes. But if you have a cold kitchen, it could take upwards of an hour. So I have found that this particular recipe gives a lot of grace when it comes to how long you let it sit before you bake it off after you have it all rolled out. So don't worry too much about that. I would say maybe give it 20-30 minutes, and then it's probably good to go. It actually does a fair amount of rising in the oven as well. So
yeah, the very first like 30 seconds you put it into the hot oven, the yeast gets all excited. It's like you're getting into a warm bath. So it gets this one more little burst of growth, and then it seals it off and holds all that wonderful bloom. So you definitely want a preheated oven. You want to have it on a baking sheet that's easy to take them off. We don't guess that they'll stick, but we always use parchment. So if you're not in the habit of buying parchment, don't use wax paper, of course, not in the oven, but you could use foil if you don't have the parchment handy. So how long do they cook?
In our oven, we have a convection at 400. We do 4 minutes, we rotate, and another 4. So they're pretty quick. In a home oven that's not convection, you probably set your oven to 425, and probably 8 to 10 minutes would do.
And remember, I always say don't count on a recipe being 100% correct on cook times. Every oven changes. In fact, Heidi had a great point. You know, our recipes need to start saying what oven we use because our ovens vary quite a bit, especially if there's not a convection fan in the back. If it's more of a traditional, it'll cook a little slower. And we've seen that happen. If your oven isn't hot enough, they'll tend to be tough and they won't have that extra bloom that happens right when you put them into the oven. So you know, sometimes the symptoms that you see will help you adjust some of the temperature variations. And so if they don't rise very well, if they're gooey in the middle, it probably means that your temperature needed to be a little hotter. Any other suggestions you can offer?
If you want, and you do like to temp your food, it should be about 210 degrees when it's done completely baking.
So an internal temperature of 210 degrees.
That will just depend on your oven. My oven at home is super even. Some of our ovens don't have the most even heat, so I would just put that up to the oven you're using. Yeah.
Should the butter be melted when you put it in?
Yes. Yes.
Definitely.
For the dough, it should be melted and at least softened for the filling. It doesn't have to be completely melted.
It really helps to have all the ingredients slightly warm. If your butter's melted too much, it will definitely make your yeast unhappy. It might even kill it, and also might make the dough sticky and more runny. So the texture is important. So not too hot. Even if you're not sure, you could temp your butter. If you let it stay in there too long, make sure it warms, cools down a bit.
What were the filling ingredients again?
The filling ingredients are the cinnamon, sugar. Yeah, we can write them down.
Brown sugar. Half a cup of vegan butter melted or softened, and a half a cup of cinnamon.
So remember that cinnamon is large. I mean, that's a lot of cinnamon. And so people often, when they learn this recipe, they think, are you sure? It's like, yes, for sure, because we've reduced the sugar so much. And if you were to compare this recipe to a typical cinnamon roll from Pinterest recipe, it would be flipped. And there'd be gobs of sugar, you know, and so again, that's what we really want to teach is how do you change a recipe to make it healthier. You've got to add more flavor. Now, we've even done these with orange. So adding orange zest to the filling would be amazing. You could add lemon. You could add pumpkin filling. We even did fruit filling. So it just opens up all kinds of options. And so again, keeping the sugar down, we could increase the phytochemicals and the antioxidants by adding in more spices and more, of course, fruits if you want to go that route. So yeah, so now let's go ahead and mix our frosting. Oh, we did. Okay. Well, we can just walk through it then. That's all right. We'll do the KitchenAid next time. But these are the ingredients. So I wanted you to at least get to see the Tofutti product. And, you know, I'm still really of the belief that the fewer ingredients, the better. So this cream cheese does have a lot of ingredients. But the good news is if somebody needs to be dairy-free, it works. So I'm just going to give you a quick intro to what is in the ingredients. Water, palm oil, maltodextrin, and then non-GMO soy protein. And then it has a little bit of thickeners. So non-dairy guar gum, locust bean gum, and xanthan gums. So again, those are familiar now that we're experts in nutrition, right? We know that those are not bad soluble fibers, but some people have sensitivities. So if you have somebody that's following certain diets that have to be low in the oligosaccharides like the FODMAP, some of these might be a problem, the guar gum and you know, some of these other thickeners. So if you wanted to go with something other than a dairy-free cream cheese, you could go back to real cream cheese. It has a lot fewer ingredients. You can get a really good quality organic cream cheese. You could also use goat cream cheese. You could use other ingredients. Ricotta would be amazing. And that, again, is a lightly fermented cheese that has the same typical qualities. This one, you know, has a nice consistency, and people really like it when they're hoping for non-dairy. And we've tried a lot of different ones. So I'm going to use this one. And so this one has become our favorite because the consistency is really nice. And so, of course, that's the guar gum at work because it keeps it nice and thick. But again, if you wanted to try something different, goat cheese and ricotta are a great mixture. Like our PHB cheese, I blend cottage cheese, goat cheese, and garlic. You could do cottage cheese and ricotta and do a really healthy, thick, naturally thick product for your filling. Okay? And then, like I mentioned in the beginning of class, I'm always thinking about ways could we improve on. And I'm thinking, what if we were to take out processed white sugar, powdered sugar, and put in honey powder? And one of the wonderful dudes in our class sent me an article just this morning about the value of honey, and that you know, it has so many wonderful ingredients in it. It's worth adding it into our diet. And you know me, I'm not a big fan of white sugar, but even with this recipe, we're using such a small amount on each of the cinnamon rolls. I still want you to feel like it's a product you can feel good about sharing at Christmas. And so, Mary, if you bring us back the plate, I want you to see the beautiful finished product of the cinnamon rolls. And actually, these are so good. Yeah, that's great. That's fine then. You can just bring them on back. We'll put them on the table and everybody can grab one. What's really nice is you can eat these beautiful cinnamon rolls with no frosting at all. They are delicious that way. I mean, we're seeing on occasion sampling and eating them with no topping at all. And that way, the only sweetener that's in there is the Merino non-GMO organic sugar. And I'm using the term organic loosely because remember, it doesn't have the organic signature on it, but instead it's processed in a way that makes it a lot healthier. So just know that there's a slight difference there, but I think it's a really important one. So hope you've enjoyed this fabulous display of our cinnamon rolls, and bon appetit.
Thank you.